really happened the night Marilyn Monroe died? Who did what in the vital hours? The answers are there, but they're elusive. Witnesses talk reluctantly, and some will talk no more. 23 years later, we are fascinated, and we'll be right back with Anthony Summers, the author of Goddess, The Secret Lives of Marilyn Monroe.
Grow cold as girls grow old, and we all lose our charms in the end. But square cut or pear shape, these rocks don't lose their shape. Diamonds are a girl's best friend.
Marilyn Monroe. Diamonds are a girl's best friend. Welcome. Anthony Summers is with us. I'm holding Goddess, The Secret Lives of Marilyn Monroe. And I compliment you as the investigative journalist we already knew you to be because of Conspiracy, who killed John F. Kennedy, and also The File on the Tsar, which you co-wrote. But this book, headlines and newspaper stories follow you from airplane to airplane and location to location. And most recently, the headlines were Rune Arledge, ABC television executive, cancels Marilyn Monroe item on 2020. Co-hosts Sylvia Chase, Hugh Downs, Barbara Walters, Geraldo Rivera join forces. Why, in your opinion, with all you have been through with this book, did an executive with the television network create even more controversy? If he had just let it run, it wouldn't have been on the front pages. It would have been TV columns.
Yes, I think that's right. Of course, the first person that I have to acknowledge for what's happened with this book is a person called Marilyn Monroe. After that, I have to thank the Chief of Police of Los Angeles, the present Chief of Police, who I think tried to preempt the book a few weeks ago by releasing what he said was the police file that he on Marilyn, which it wasn't. It was a part of a file. And finally, I have to thank Rune Arledge, and I'm sure that wasn't his intention, as you rightly say. The 2020 program had my material months ago, had the proofs of the book, but they did not have me ethically, especially since the problems over General Westmoreland and all of that a year or so ago. They steer a very careful ethical line. There can be no involvement with the author of a book on which they're working. And so they went away, did their own work on key aspects of the end of Marilyn's life. Clearly the Kennedy connection. Was there a Kennedy connection? They corroborated what I had established in the book and took it somewhat further. They looked at the weekend that Marilyn died, and they looked especially at what I think was for the journalists on that program. Sylvia Chase told me that this for her was the story within the story, from a hard journalism point of view. The involvement of organized crime and Teamsters leader Jimmy Hoffa in surveilling the Kennedys with women, and specifically surveilling, putting bugs in Marilyn's homes on the eastern and west coasts, and in Peter Lawford, the president's brother-in-law house at Santa Monica. The aim, clearly, was to get smear material on the Kennedy brothers, and particularly on Robert Kennedy, who was then prosecuting Jimmy Hoffa as never before, with a view to putting pressure on the presidency. That is the story they put together. Rune Arledge, after 2 weeks of havering, took it off the air, and then trashed his own staff in public. And that's, I think, what really led to the furore. He said that they had put together unsubstantiated gossip. And Hugh Downs, thank you, Hugh Downs and Barbara Walters, went publicly defending the journalism of their colleagues, and I like to think, by implication also my own, by saying that it was a better documented piece of material than anything the media produced during Watergate. As you say, effectively, I suppose in terms of getting people to read my book rather than watch a fleeting piece of television, Mr. Arledge did me a favor. But it was a sad day for journalism, because in as much as I know American television, 2020 is a program of integrity and good journalism, and this will taint it.
Do you have any kind of comparable experience is a man who, upon graduation, headed for Switzerland and worked in broadcasting and returned to England and the BBC, and received the attention you did working on a program called Panorama, which to England is indeed, or was indeed at your time, what 20/20 or 60 Minutes means in North American broadcasting. Did you get memos from the president, from the head of departments, telling you what you might or might not do with stories?
I can honestly say that there was never, ever that kind of intervention. There was certainly never a total withdrawal of a program from the air, although it was very difficult from 1969 onwards to tread an acceptable line on Northern Ireland. In England, Northern Ireland is the problem for broadcasters. As we saw this last summer, I was no longer at the BBC, but we saw the huge furore over the action by the Board of Governors in taking that program off the air. That, though, in the end was very much a furore about the governors listening to the government and making an editorial decision which is supposed to be the Director General's decision. In other words, the Roone Arledge figure, if you like, the head of news, should have that editorial role. Happily, in England, the decision on that Irish program has been reversed with some alterations, and I don't think damaging changes. The program by now either has been transmitted or will be shortly. I don't think that'll happen to the Monroe segment on 2020. I think that's been deep six for keeps. Hope I'm wrong.
How interesting, Tony, because the length of the segment originally was 26 minutes. It was then reduced on order.
But it was filleted. It was gutted.
Yes, until finally it was less than 13 minutes long, reduced yet again, and while Sylvia Chase sat in a makeup room having her face made up, she learned it was not going on the air at all.
That's right. I, as an outsider, and they very correctly kept me as an outsider through this, nevertheless wanted to know when it would be going, how long it would be. And I could tell the producers were desperate to tell me what was happening. They were basically sitting in meetings during the day, fighting for their program and for their journalism, and then desperately editing all night. I think they should have, perhaps, and one can always talk with hindsight, perhaps they should have stood firm earlier on and said, no, you either have your 26-minute segment or you don't have it. They submitted to it being filleted, gutted, cut down, and I think the 14-minute segment, I'm perhaps glad that wasn't shown. I think that might have been a bloodless nothing. And as you say, had that been transmitted, perhaps it would all have vanished on the air and we'd have heard nothing about it.
Do you have a copy of the complete 26 minutes?
No, I don't.
Do you expect it to be gifted with one?
It's held very close.
Weren't you in California recently?
Yes.
And you entered a room at a party, at a gathering, in which Ethel Kennedy was present?
No. I haven't seen Ethel Kennedy since 1968. If she was there, she was hiding behind the arras.
Perhaps she was. She was at the Beverly Hills Hotel and was overheard telling someone that she had been at an event the night before at which you were present.
Tell me about it.
No, the story simply was that she couldn't decide whether to walk over and reintroduce herself just to see the expression on your face. Obviously, she chose not to.
It would have been a fascinating moment. I don't think I would have had any great trouble with it. I have reported what I found out on the Kennedy matter. I was doing a biography of Marilyn Monroe. If I had not investigated the alleged Kennedy connection, you would have been asking me on this program, why not? No journalist with any kind of reporting background had ever done that before. Only one journalist did so at the time. Recently I called up the man who had been the crack reporter on the LA Times in 1962 when Marilyn died, and said to him, what happened? Why was there, basically in the newspapers in Los Angeles, your town, at the time, there was just the panoply of the event, the screaming headlines, and some tittle-tattle about telephone calls and housekeeper talks, but nothing that you could call reporting. And he Sandy McCulloch, now editor of the Sacramento Bee, a distinguished newspaper. And he said, you know, I'm waiting 20 years for somebody to ask me about that. I was on holiday at the time, and he said, I've never been sure since whether to regret it or be grateful, because I was a crack reporter. He didn't use those words, but he was the lead reporter for the newspaper. And he said, I wanted to cover it. I couldn't wait to go, to turn the car around and drive back to Los Angeles. But with hindsight, I know that if I'd gone and I'd done it and I'd written it, the story would simply have been spiked. The Kennedys were very close to the Chandlers, who owned the LA Times. And had the story been spiked, it would not have been the first time that a story adverse to that particular political dynasty would have been suddenly dumped. A case in point, I talked to Jack Tobin, who in those days, and still, a very good Los Angeles reporter. During the 1960 convention, Tobin was asked by his editor to basically follow the candidate for a couple of days. So it was the story of a couple of days in the life of the candidate. And so he was following John Kennedy literally around with no particularly snooping intention. But Tobin has very good law enforcement contacts. And the senior DA's investigator suggested to him that he should be at a certain hour outside an address. And he was. And at a given moment, the front door opened, and there was a woman embracing John Kennedy and saying goodnight to him, and there was Jack Tobin scribbling in his notebook and his photographer taking the pictures. Now, they drove back to the newspaper. As Tobin tells it, he started tapping out his whole story, but including a reference to this, and obviously that had come up the copy. And the pictures were going through the soup, and the story was never written. The picture never saw the light of day, because Robert Kennedy had, according to Tobin, Robert Kennedy personally, in the sense of being his brother's manager, had called management of the newspaper and had then had the story killed. The significance of it is not just that a story about the president-to-be being embraced by a woman had been killed. The identity of the woman is the interesting thing. She was Judith Campbell, who, as we finally learned when the Senate Intelligence Committee told us in 1975, was in the same period of the presidency, going not only with John Kennedy, but also with one of the most powerful mafiosi in the country, Sam Giancana. Now, had that story not been killed, would John Kennedy ever have allowed himself to be drawn so far into such dangerous water during his presidency?
I will hold that thought. We'll take a commercial break and be right back, okay? Be right back with Anthony Summers and more.
While tearing off a game of golf, I may make a play for the caddy. But when I do, I don't follow through, 'cause my heart belongs to Daddy. If I invite...
Talking about your biography of Marilyn Monroe. Why, 23 years later, do we care?
Marilyn's become, for a number of people who were not born when she died, perhaps what she was for me, because I was never one of her fans. She's become a poster person, a cardboard icon. And yet, yes, she seems to transmit something. I talked to the actor Eli Wallach, who knew Marilyn well from the actor studio days in New York in the mid-50s. He told me a story of walking down a Manhattan street with Marilyn. She was dressed in baggy pants and a baggy top and a scarf around her head and no makeup. And nobody was looking, to his relief. And then suddenly, everyone was looking, and he looked around to see, was Marilyn wiggling? And she wasn't wiggling. And he said, but, what have you done? And she said, I don't know. I guess I just started being Marilyn.